Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. Ever since I started my deep inner work journey about a decade ago, I've experienced this strange phenomenon of the further along the path I walk, the fewer and fewer men that I encounter who know anything about or care to know anything about professional sports. It's like two worlds are completely mutually exclusive from one another. Either like you're a rabid sports enthusiast who knows nothing about inner work or personal development, or you're someone who's a rabid personal development, inner work enthusiast who knows nothing about sports. Now, I know I'm oversimplifying this, but kind of not. Like there's a lot of truth to this. And these two worlds mean everything to me. For most of my early years, there was nothing other than the world of sports. I was a huge Yankees fan, New York Knicks fan, New York Jets fan, still am to this day. And I grew up playing baseball and football. Those were the center of my life. I collected sports cards. And obviously to a detriment because my world was really narrow. It was the only thing that I really paid attention to or loved. I definitely didn't know anything about inner work. But as I've moved along my path and started to recognize the value, the life-changing value of doing deep inner work, my love and appreciation for sport has actually deepened because I can see beyond just the win-lose, black and white paradigm of competition in professional sports, but I can see deeper layers of what sport brings out in all of us, right? Personal achievement, overcoming limits and obstacles, seeing teams come together, being so much greater than the sum of their parts, leadership, whether it's from the coach or from individuals on the team, heroic moments, how teams have lost their best players and then gone on to gel and create some new identity. Like the more that I do this inner work, the more I have love for sport. And I wonder why more men can't seem to bridge the gap between the two. So it's something that I question and I've been pondering it quite a bit. And if you're one of those men who loves both sport and inner work, please let me know that I'm not alone. Reach out to me and let me know that you're out there. Now, the reason why I brought that up today is because I've been pondering a question that I think sport can really help to answer. And the question that I've been pondering a lot lately is, why does so much of our achievement seem to come at the expense of humanity? Like, why does so much of what we achieve seem to come at the expense of humanity? Like, why can't our achievement come with generative humanity? Why can't our achievement come with heart? Why can't our achievement come with love? Why can't our achievement come with the deepening of relationships? And the best way to share that story with you, or to share what I'm talking about with you, is to share with you a story of two of the greatest sports dynasties of my lifetime. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But one of the things that triggered this is I was watching one of my favorite shows last night, Billions. It's on Showtime. It's in its 5th season. If you don't know the show, Bobby Axelrod, which is played by Damien Lewis, who's an incredible character. He was in Band of Brothers. He was in Homeland, 2 of my favorite series. He's been in a bunch of other stuff too. He's an incredible actor. He plays Bobby Axelrod in Billions. And Bobby Axelrod is like this huge carnivorous monster of a hedge fund manager. That's how he refers to himself, like a carnivorous monster. He's this uber successful multi-billionaire that many in the world of finance idolize because he's undefeated. He's like the king. And he's taken his lumps, but he's like the smartest, he's the shrewdest, he's willing to go to the limits. And he's definitely plays not just in the gray zone, but in the dark side of things because the world that he's chosen to play in is, I will win at the expense of others. I will grow fat off of being the parasite of businesses and communities, tearing down others so I can look more successful, even when, the rest of the world, because of his existence, actually gets a little bit worse, maybe sometimes a lot worse. It's made me think of Vishen Lakhiani, who is the CEO and founder of Mind Valley and the author of the New York Times bestselling book, The Code of the Extraordinary Mind. And he talks about businesses in 2 lenses. Is this a humanity plus business or a humanity minus business? For example, let's talk about Philip Morris, right? Philip Morris is a tobacco company, right? Now, if you look at Philip Morris just as a business through the lens of like, does it generate profit? It is an extremely valuable company. I don't even know how many multi-billions it's worth. I don't know how many tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of employees that it employs. And it certainly generates a lot of profit and revenue, financially speaking. So if you just looked at through the lens of is this business a success or not, then yes, it's a resounding success from a bottom line perspective. If you pull out the lens and you broaden the view and say, let's look at Philip Morris in the context of broader humanity and what its service provides, which is tobacco, cigarettes, and what happens when you factor in the destructive effects of lung cancer, of economic burdens because people can't pay their bills, or cancer treatments, chemotherapy treatments. Let's talk about the emotional effects of someone going through a cancer diagnosis and a terminal illness, and then their family and the businesses that suffer. If you factor in all of the destruction that the existence of a tobacco company brings into play, does it actually provide a benefit to humanity, or is it a negative? Is it a humanity minus business? And Vishen would look at that and say it's an absolutely obvious humanity minus business, except maybe for the few people who get employed in that job. And it's not few people. I mean, even if you're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, like that's not an insignificant number of people. But when you look at the broader impact of the hundreds of millions of people or the billions of people that get affected by it, it in fact is a humanity minus business. And one of the things that I think that only recently I've woken up to is like, what is it that I'm celebrating, right? Like when I'm looking at achievement, when I'm looking at business, when I'm looking at who's standing on the gold medal podium, am I simply celebrating just that success, just that achievement, or am I also factoring in how they got there? Am I factoring in how they treated the people that worked for them or the people that helped train them? Am I factoring in whether, let's say in a man's case, like did he ignore his family? Did he not show up for his kids as he was on his way to climbing to the top? Like, am I factoring that stuff in? Am I holding that to a standard where there is success? Like where I can determine, yes, this man may have been successful because he achieved X, Y, Z. In that respect, he's successful, but he's a incompetent failure because he didn't bring heart or he didn't bring humanity. And that leads me to talking about two of the greatest dynasties, sports dynasties of my lifetime, at least in the sports that I follow, right? My top three sports are football and baseball are kind of like number 1 and 2, and they interchange at any given point in time. I grew up playing those sports. And basketball is a distant third, but it's still there. And I want to talk to you about I have to leave out the New York Yankees dynasty, even though that's like my team, and they were huge in the early 2000s, late 90s. They had 4 World Series in a period of 5 years. They were absolutely dominant. But I want to talk about 2 teams that actually won 6 championships under the same coach and star regime. So let's look at the Chicago Bulls. And I know I've been talking about them a lot lately because I cracked out on the Michael Jordan Last Dance documentary. And I told you I read the subsequent, I revisited a book that Phil Jackson wrote that I read 20 years ago. And it's one of the most powerful leadership books I've ever read, Sacred Hoops by Phil Jackson, the coach. Phil Jackson has won 13 total NBA titles, 2 as a player, 6 with the Bulls, 5 with the Lakers, right? So he's just a legendary coach. And then we're going to talk about the Tom Brady and Bill Belichick New England Patriots, okay? So Tom Brady and Bill Belichick had about a 20-year run together, I think maybe exactly 20 years, where they won 6 Super Bowls together. No other player and coach have ever won 6 Super Bowls together, not coach and quarterback. No quarterback has ever won 6. So, Tom Brady stands on his own in terms of the greatest of all time, in my mind. At least from a hardware perspective, 6 titles. No one else has got that, so he stands alone. Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson won 6 NBA titles over an 8-year period together. And the 2 years they didn't win in the middle, right? They won 3 championships, 2 years they didn't, 3 years after that they won. The 2 years in the middle was when Michael Jordan went on to play went on to play minor league baseball with the Chicago White Sox. So the 6 years where Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan played together for that period of time, they won every single time in a full season together. All right, 2 dynasties, like unrivaled, right? Going down as the biggest dynasties, at least of my lifetime at this point. Now, when I watched the Michael Jordan documentaries, after they'd won their 6th title together, Michael Jordan said, if Phil Jackson does not come back as my coach, I'm no longer playing for the Chicago Bulls. He grew to love Phil Jackson. He said, I would never come back and play for the Bulls unless Phil Jackson comes back. Otherwise, I will retire. And that's exactly what ended up happening. Phil Jackson decided that he needed to move on. Michael Jordan decided to retire for a period of 3 years, right before he came back and played a forgettable couple of years with the Washington Wizards. And what that told me was Michael Jordan had loyalty, had love, had the deepest level of respect for Phil Jackson that he wouldn't want to play for any other coach, at least in a Chicago Bulls uniform. You know, when Phil Jackson, when he writes in his book in Sacred Hoops, about how he approaches life, he relies upon the teachings of a book called The Teachings of Don Juan. And there's this quote that he cites in Sacred Hoops where it's basically like, if you are looking at all of the paths of your life that you could potentially take, you should ask yourself, do these paths have a heart? Do these paths that I can choose to take have a heart? And if they do, then take those paths. If it does not have a heart, then don't take that path. And I certainly know that there was most of the time in my life where I never asked that question. It was, does this path have the most money available to me? Does this path have safety and security? Does this path allow me to rise up the ranks? I asked all those questions, chose those paths. And I know what that ended up leading me to when I turned 30, had the best sales year of my life, made 7 figures, tripled my sales goal, and felt a fleeting moment of joy before I kind of came crashing back down to, what the hell? What was that all about? Never asked the question of, does this path have a heart? And once I started asking that question, everything changed for me, right? Michael Jordan, Phil Jackson had heart together. They loved one another. You hear them talk about each other. They have a deep level of respect and admiration for one another. Look at what happened with the New England Patriots and Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. Tom Brady now left the New England Patriots to go take a 2-year deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the reason why, and their camps are pretty tight-lipped around the reasons why Tom Brady left, but the stuff that has come out is that he didn't feel appreciated by Bill Belichick. And if you know anything about Bill Belichick, like, this guy is not winning any personality contests, right? Like, he is legendary for standing at podiums, being monotone, like just emotionless. Like, this is how he kind of lives his life. When, there's many shots of him. Like, there's YouTube compilations of like the team achieving incredible success and him standing on the sidelines just unmoved. It looks like he's staring at like paint drying, right? This is how like a big part of his disposition and his demeanor. Now, I'm not going to fault somebody for not being the most jovial, exciting man in the world. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, I deeply respect Bill Belichick's knowledge of the game, his boldness, his pioneering wisdom, his ability to kind of put people and construct teams in a way where you can have dominant levels of success over a 20-year period of time. I'm a New York Jets fan. I'm in the same division as the New England Patriots. I've seen our asses get kicked over time. And so I admire the result. But when I started asking the question about, has his leadership had a heart? It's a much different answer that I get. Tom Brady felt disposable, expendable, as many of the former players under Bill Belichick's regime have spoken about. They're a cog in a wheel. As soon as they slip in value, and I know that football is a business and basketball is a business, and a lot of tough conversations have to be had. Phil Jackson had tough conversations about players that he loved who had slipped, that no longer had the same value to the team and needed to let them go or trade them. But there's something about how their players under Phil Jackson felt the love and recognized a need to make business decisions. Not every player felt that way. So I'm sure some players don't have the greatest relationship with Phil Jackson. It's just kind of the way it goes. But I look at how Bill Belichick and his star player, who won 6 Super Bowls for him over a 20-year period of time, and I think went to, 8 or 9 total Super Bowls, which is just absurd. The fact that his top guy, his top dog, like the number 1 and number 2 guys, he and his top player, ended up fracturing their relationship because Tom Brady felt disrespected, felt like his coach didn't value him, let him walk. And I wonder, in our society, why we praise so much of the success without caveating, without holding a level of humanity to a higher standard, and saying, like, asking those deeper questions, like, are you just running a business where you look at the humans as interchangeable cogs in a wheel? And do we accept that as fans? People who love stories of heroes because those are fucking people. Like, I love Tom. I'm a Jets fan. I hate what Tom Brady's done to the Jets, but I love the fact that he's a human being who got drafted in the 6th round, who was always passed over, even in college, who decided to make something of himself and not allow anyone else to tell him who he could or couldn't be, and became the greatest of all time. The very reason why we love him is because he's human. His story is so human. And then to have someone treat players like they're just interchangeable, disposable humans, it doesn't jive with me. And the fact that we don't ask that question, that we don't bring that into the conversation around success nearly enough, it bothers me. And so I'm going to start with myself. When I talk about who I think is the most successful, when I pedestal someone for what they've achieved, I'm also going to look behind the hood and find out how they did it, how they treated the people around them when they did it. That is just as important to me as what they've done on paper, as the medals they've won, as the hardware that they've taken home, the championships that they've won. Like, that is going to be just as important to me. And yes, while I will continue to respect the level of expertise that Bill Belichick brings to the game, his innovations that he's brought to the game, his level of just like consistent success, of course I respect all of that. But I also have to wonder, is he humanity plus or humanity minus? And sometimes it's not so easy to put into a binary like that, but I know that I'm committed to asking a deeper question when I look at the path of success. There was a man who reached out to me after listening to the podcast that I did on It's Time to Get More Curious About Your Father. And his name is either Niels or Niles. I'm sorry, my friend, if you're listening to this episode, that I don't know exactly how to pronounce your name. But, he said that a piece of wisdom that he learned from his father early on in his life was, don't ever allow someone else to define what success looks like for you. Who are they to judge? It is up to you to define what success looks like for you. Because at the end of your life, you're the only one who really matters in terms of defining what that feels like for you. And so for me, I know what it feels like to win and to achieve, to not feel my heart in the process. I know what it's like to not treat people the best because I needed to get something done. And I also know what it's like to have an eye towards excellence, to achieve excellence, to create from a place of excellence, and also to treat others with excellence, to be a man who wants to generate not just for myself, like a Bobby Axelrod from Billions, at the expense of others, but I want to generate for myself and others. I want my kingdom to flourish. And not just because I'm pillaging what happens outside of my kingdom. No, like I'm here to build, to grow. That is just as important to me as bringing home the hardware. So does achievement have to come at the expense of humanity? Phil Jackson has shown me that it doesn't. And I believe that it doesn't. And I'm committed to making sure that it doesn't.